Most people are destroyed not by their failures, but by their victories. Sit with that for a moment, because it runs against everything we have been taught. We are told to fear failure. We are warned about setbacks, rejection, loss. We build resilience for the hard times. We prepare ourselves for the moments when everything falls apart. And yet, history, quiet, patient, unsentimental history, tells a different story. It tells the story of men and women who survived every hardship, who climbed through every difficulty, who endured long enough to taste what they had been working for, and then, in the sweetness of that moment, began to come undone. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, slowly, in ways they did not notice until the distance between who they had been and who they were becoming was too wide to easily cross back. This is one of the most under-examined dangers in human life, the danger that lives not in your lowest moments, but in your highest ones. The danger that arrives not wearing the face of adversity, but wearing the face of reward, victory, comfort, arrival. These are the things that most often end a man, and almost no one is talking about it. If this kind of thinking resonates with you, slow, deep, and honest, subscribe to Stoic Mindset. This is a space for people who are serious about building themselves from the inside out. Subscribe now, and let's continue. There is a pattern that repeats itself across human lives with such regularity that it almost qualifies as a law of nature. A person starts from nothing, or near enough to nothing. They are hungry, genuinely hungry, not metaphorically, for something better. A better life, a stronger body, a more stable financial situation, a career that means something. That hunger is clean. It is honest. It does not require management or motivation because it is generated automatically by the gap between where they are and where they want to be. And so they work, they sacrifice, they say no to things that would distract them. They wake up earlier than they want to, stay later than is comfortable, push through the resistance that ordinary people surrender to. They are building something. They can feel it taking shape beneath their hands, even when no one else can see it yet. Then, one day, the thing arrives. The goal is reached. The milestone is hit. The number in the account crosses a threshold they once only dreamed about. The body in the mirror finally reflects the months of discipline they poured into it. The business turns its first real profit. The relationship they built becomes solid. Whatever the destination was, they arrive. And for a moment, it is everything they imagined it would be. Then something subtle begins to happen. Something that happens so gradually that it rarely announces itself. The urgency that once woke them up in the morning begins to soften. The hunger that made sacrifice feel worthwhile begins to quiet. The sharp edge of their discipline, honed through months or years of consistent pressure, begins to dull. Not because they chose to let it, but because the pressure that maintained it has been released. They sleep a little later. They miss a session, then another. They spend money they told themselves they would save. They stop reading. They stop pushing. They begin, almost imperceptibly, to coast. And coasting, when you are moving forward, feels like progress. It feels like reward. It feels, for a time, like exactly what you deserve. This is where the real danger lives. Not in the coasting itself. Rest is legitimate. Recovery is necessary. But in the coasting that becomes a new standard. In the relaxation that never ends. In the moment when a temporary exhale becomes a permanent posture. This is how most people lose what they built. Not through catastrophe, through comfort. Why victory can be dangerous. To understand why victory is dangerous, you have to understand something about how the human mind relates to goals. When we are pursuing something we have not yet achieved, the mind is oriented outward and forward. There is a gap, a real, felt gap, between the current reality and the desired one, and that gap creates psychological tension. That tension is not comfortable, but it is productive. It is the engine of focused effort. It is what makes a person choose the difficult thing over the easy one, again and again, over long periods of time. The moment the goal is reached, that tension releases. And this is entirely natural. The mind is not designed for permanent striving. It is designed to pursue, achieve, and then rest. That sequence is ancient and written deeply into the architecture of human psychology. There is nothing wrong with it. The problem is what we do in the rest phase. Or more precisely, what we fail to do. Because the rest phase, if it extends without a new source of tension, a new goal, a new challenge, a new gap to close, it begins to erode the very habits that produced the victory in the first place. And habits, as Aristotle observed with great clarity, are not static things. They are alive. They require feeding. A habit that is not practiced is not simply paused. It is weakened, slowly, consistently, in the direction of its opposite. Aristotle's entire framework of virtue was built on this understanding. He taught that excellence is not a state you arrive at and then possess. It is a practice, a continuous exercise of the soul in the direction of its highest capacity. The moment you stop exercising it, you do not remain at the level you reached. You begin to drift back, not all at once, not visibly, but the drift is real, and if left unattended, it compounds. This is the first danger of victory. It creates the illusion of arrival. The feeling that you have now become the thing you worked to become, that the identity is fixed, that the achievement is permanent. But identity is not a destination. It is a direction. And the moment you stop moving in that direction, you have quietly begun moving in another one. The second danger is subtler. Success creates a new baseline. Once you have experienced comfort, discipline, rest, and reward, the previous level of discomfort that you accepted without much complaint begins to feel unreasonable. The early mornings that once felt necessary now feel excessive. The sacrifices that once felt purposeful now feel optional. The standard that produced the victory has been invisibly raised in your head, not in the direction of more, but in the direction of less. You begin to negotiate with yourself. Just this once. I've earned this. I worked hard to get here. And all of that may be true. But the negotiation is where it starts, not with a dramatic surrender, with a reasonable sounding compromise. And then another, and then another, each one feeling justified, each one making the next one easier. Rumi, the poet and mystic whose understanding of the inner life cuts through centuries without losing its precision, wrote that the quieting of inner fire is not a sudden event. It is the accumulated result of small choices, made in small moments that feel insignificant individually and devastating in some. He understood that the inner life, the seat of discipline, of conviction, of the will to keep going, is not invulnerable simply because it was once strong. Strength requires maintenance. Flame requires fuel. The fire that once drove you does not guarantee itself. The third danger, and perhaps the most insidious, is what success does to your relationship with difficulty. Before the victory, Difficulty was familiar. You were accustomed to it. You had a working relationship with discomfort. You knew how to enter it, how to move through it, how to come out the other side. That relationship was one of your most valuable assets, though you may not have recognized it by that name. After the victory, after the extended rest, after the comfort has settled in, the relationship changes. Difficulty no longer feels familiar. It feels foreign, and things that feel foreign feel harder than they actually are. The person who returns to the discipline after a long absence finds that the distance between where they are and where they were is far greater than they imagined. And that distance is demoralizing in a way that the original starting point never was, because now there is a previous version of themselves to compare against. This is the complete arc of the danger, the illusion of arrival, the renegotiation of standards, the loss of familiarity with difficulty. Three quiet processes working together in the aftermath of every victory that is not met with the right response. Aristotle wrote about something he called the golden mean, the point of excellence that exists between two extremes. But what is less often discussed is his understanding of how that mean is maintained. He did not believe that a person, once having found the mean, could simply rest there. He believed that virtue, which is what the mean represents, is constantly being pulled in two directions simultaneously. Toward excess on one side, toward deficiency on the other. Applied to our topic, the person who has achieved their goal is not standing still. They are being pulled toward excess, toward indulgence, laziness, the overcorrection of rest. And the only thing that holds them at the mean, that keeps them at the level they earned, is the same active, intentional practice that got them there. The practice does not become unnecessary after success. It becomes more necessary, because now there is something to protect. This is a profound reframing of what discipline actually is. Most people understand discipline as the tool for getting something. Aristotle's insight is that discipline is also, and perhaps more importantly, the tool for keeping something, for maintaining the character that the achievement required, for staying, as he would put it, in the shape that the virtue demands. Rumi's contribution to this conversation operates on a different register, less structural, more interior. He spoke often about the nafs, the lower self, the part of the human being that is drawn toward ease, avoidance, and the comfort of the familiar. He was not condemning comfort itself. He was describing a dynamic, that the lower self does not rest. It does not take a break simply because you have achieved something. It is always present, always offering the easier path, always whispering that you have done enough, that you deserve a break, that the pressure can safely be released. The person who is awake to this dynamic, who understands that the inner negotiation never fully ends, is the person who does not get ambushed by their own comfort. They are not surprised when the pull toward ease intensifies after a victory. They expected it, they prepared for it, and they meet it not with struggle, but with the quiet, practiced refusal of someone who knows exactly what is happening and what it costs to surrender. There is also wisdom worth drawing from the ancient Pythagorean tradition, the idea that what a person practices, they become, not what they achieve, not what they are recognized for, what they practice day after day in the ordinary moments that no one is watching. This is a more demanding idea than it first appears, because it places the entire weight of identity not on the milestone, but on the habit. It says, in effect, that the achievement does not define you. The daily practice defines you. And if the daily practice stops after the achievement, then the achievement is, in a deep sense, already fading, not yet visibly, but structurally. This is a hard thing to accept. We want the victory to mean something permanent. We want the arrival to be real. But the most honest ancient thinkers, across traditions, across centuries, kept returning to the same uncomfortable truth. Permanence must be earned, continuously, in the present tense. There is no past tense version of discipline that protects you today. Let us consider a man who has spent 2 years building something from nothing. A small business, nothing glamorous, nothing that made headlines, just a real thing, built with real effort, funded by early mornings and late nights and the willingness to do things that felt beneath him when he was starting out. He makes his first significant profit, not a fortune by any standard, but more than he has ever held in his hands as a direct result of his own work. He feels, for the first time, that it was worth it, that the sacrifice made sense. And then, very naturally, he exhales. He buys something he had been telling himself he would buy once he made it. He takes a holiday he had been deferring for 2 years. He tells himself, and this part is important, he tells himself that he has earned it, which is true. He has. No one is disputing the reward. The question is what happens after the reward. Whether the exhale becomes a new breath leading back into the work, or whether it becomes a new posture, a new baseline, a new relationship with the comfort he once sacrificed so willingly. What often happens in the lives of people who do not understand the danger of this moment is that the new comfort quietly rewrites the old hunger. The urgency fades. The business, which required his full attention to grow, now receives his divided attention because he has other things now, pleasant things, things that feel like the reward he earned. The business begins to plateau, then, almost imperceptibly, to drift. He is still working, technically, but he is no longer building, he is maintaining. And maintenance, without forward pressure, is just slow decline wearing a different name. Or consider a woman who spent 8 months in strict discipline, tracking everything she ate, training 6 days a week, saying no to the meals and the evenings and the social occasions that would have interfered with the goal. She reaches it. She looks exactly as she set out to look. She feels strong, capable, in control of something she had long felt was not in her control. She photographs the result. She deserves to. It represents real work. Then, because the goal is reached, the structure that produced it begins to loosen. 1 rest week becomes 2. 2 becomes a new normal. The tracking stops because it feels excessive now that the goal is met. The discipline that once felt essential begins to feel optional, and the body, which adapted upward in response to consistent pressure, adapts downward in response to its absence. 6 months later, she is not where she started, but she is moving in that direction. And the loss is harder to accept than the original difficulty was, because she knows exactly what she is losing, and she can remember precisely what it cost to build it. Or consider something even simpler. A young man who works diligently at his craft, writing, music, whatever form it takes, and begins to receive recognition for it. Not fame, just acknowledgement. The feeling of being seen, of being told that the thing he made is good. It is a legitimate feeling. It is, in some ways, the fuel, that kept him going through the period when no one was paying attention. But recognition, if it arrives before the craft has reached its full depth, can do something quietly damaging. It can make the current level feel like the destination rather than a point on a longer journey. The hunger to improve, which was once self-generated because there was no external validation to substitute for it, now has competition. The approval is easier to receive than the discipline is to maintain. And so, little by little, the improvement slows. The work becomes about producing more of what was already recognized, rather than pushing past it into territory that has not yet been approved. This is how early recognition can limit a person more effectively than early rejection ever could. Because rejection clarifies the gap, recognition obscures it. 3 different lives, 3 different versions of the same story. The shape of the victory changes, but the pattern does not. The hidden decline. The most dangerous thing about decline after success is that it does not feel like decline. That is the central fact of it, and it deserves to be held carefully. When a person is in the early stages of losing what they built, they do not experience it as loss. They experience it as balance, as moderation, as the natural, healthy correction after a period of intensity. And many of those rationalizations are partially true, which is what makes them so effective as camouflage. Rest is real. Recovery is real. Balance is real. The human being cannot operate at maximum intensity indefinitely, and anyone who claims otherwise is not wise. They are simply unaware of their own limits. But there is a category of rest that is recovery, and a category of rest that is retreat. Recovery prepares you to return. Retreat quietly redefines what returning means. Aristotle understood that habits once formed require less conscious energy to maintain than they did to establish. But they still require something. The person who believes that a built habit is permanently secured, that it will persist without tending, is working from a misunderstanding of how character actually functions. Character is not a possession, it is an activity. Stop the activity, and the possession begins to dissolve, slowly, without drama, with a patience that outlasts most people's attention spans. This is why the decline after success is so often invisible until it is significant. Because each individual day of reduced discipline is genuinely small. One missed session, one untracked meal, one morning slept through, one difficult conversation avoided. None of these things feel like the beginning of a pattern. They feel like exceptions. They feel like the earned flexibility of someone who has already proven themselves. But patterns do not care how they are described. They care about what actually happens, repeated across time. And what actually happens, accumulated across enough days, produces a reality that the individual exceptions never seemed capable of producing. The man who drifts does not wake up one morning having decided to become less than he was. He wakes up every morning making small, reasonable-seeming decisions that, in aggregate, produce that result. This is the hidden architecture of decline. It is made of reasonable moments, and it is almost impossible to see from the inside while it is happening, because the inside is always explaining each moment individually, never seeing the shape of all the moments together. The Stoic correction. The response to victory, then, is not celebration followed by rest, or rather, it is not only that. The complete response to victory includes something most people skip entirely: the deliberate reassertion of discipline in the immediate aftermath of success. This sounds counterintuitive. It may even sound joyless, but it is neither. It is simply the understanding that the victory was produced by a particular way of living, and that the way of living does not become unnecessary because the victory arrived. The victory is the evidence that the method works. The rational response to evidence that a method works is to continue the method, not to retire it at the moment of its greatest vindication. What this looks like in practice is specific and unglamorous. It looks like returning to the work the morning after the celebration. Not because the celebration was wrong, but because the work is not finished. And the work was never only about this particular milestone. The milestone was a marker on a longer road, not the end of the road itself. It looks like resisting the renegotiation. The inner voice that begins to soften the standard, that offers the compromise, that suggests the pressure can now safely be reduced. That voice must be recognized for what it is. Not wisdom, not balance. The pull toward the easier path, dressed in the language of self-care. It can be acknowledged without being obeyed. It looks like building the next challenge before the current victory has fully settled, not out of anxiety or the inability to rest, but out of the understanding that the gap, the productive tension between where you are and where you intend to be, is not just the source of your effort, it is the source of your aliveness. People without something to pursue do not simply rest, they quietly diminish. The goal is not to never stop. It is to never stop for so long that stopping becomes the new identity. Aristotle would frame this as the maintenance of virtue through practice. Rumi would frame it as the refusal to let the inner fire go cold. The language differs across traditions and centuries, but the instruction is consistent. The work of building a self is never completed by a single victory. It is the ongoing work of every day that follows. There is also something important to say about the relationship between emotion and achievement. One of the deeper insights across ancient philosophical traditions is that attachment to results, both positive and negative, pulls a person away from the clarity they need to keep performing at the level they are capable of. This is not an instruction to feel nothing. It is an instruction not to let the feeling of victory become an identity, not to confuse the achievement with the achiever, not to let the milestone define the person, because the person must continue long after the milestone has passed. The man who wins and becomes his win is a man who has stopped growing, because growth requires the admission that there is more to do, more to become, more to understand. And the man who is fully occupied with being the person who won has no room for that admission. Stay disciplined not because discipline is a punishment, but because it is the condition under which your best self remains available to you. The moment discipline becomes optional, so does the version of you that discipline produces. Practical application. What does this actually look like? Not as a principle, but as a practice. It begins with the decision made in advance that victory will not change the structure. This is not a vague intention, it is a specific commitment. The person who has decided beforehand that the morning practice continues after the goal is reached, that the financial discipline persists after the first profit, that the craft continues to be pushed after the first recognition, that person is not caught off guard by the comfort that follows success. They expected it. They prepared a response for it, and the response was already decided before the situation arose, which means the temptation has far less power over it. This is what Aristotle meant when he said that virtue is not a series of individual decisions made in the heat of the moment. It is the result of prior choices about who you intend to be. The person who has pre-decided their response to success does not need willpower in the moment. They need only follow the commitment they already made. The second practice is what might be called the audit of the new baseline. Every few months, or after every significant achievement, the honest person asks themselves a set of uncomfortable questions. Am I applying the same standard I was applying when I was building this? Is the level of effort I am giving today consistent with the level that produced the result I am now enjoying? What have I quietly stopped doing that I used to do? What have I quietly started doing that I used to resist? These questions are not comfortable. That is why most people do not ask them. But they are the questions that separate the person who sustains their achievement from the person who was temporarily defined by it. The third practice is the deliberate pursuit of a new difficulty. Not because comfort is evil, but because ease, without the counterweight of challenge, produces a softness that gradually erodes the capacity you built. The person who is always in pursuit, not frantic, not anxious, but genuinely engaged with something that requires more from them than they currently have, is the person who remains sharp, remains hungry, remains in the relationship with difficulty that made them capable of achievement in the first place. Rumi's image of the reed, cut from the reed bed, crying for its origin, and making music precisely from the wound, is not only a metaphor for longing. It is a description of the person who has accepted that growth requires a kind of pain, and who does not run from that requirement after they have tasted what the effort produces. The music does not come from the comfort. It comes from the continued willingness to be shaped by what is hard. Build your identity around the practice, not the achievement. The person whose identity is built on what they have accomplished is vulnerable, because accomplishments are fixed in the past, and the past cannot be relied upon to produce energy for the present. The person whose identity is built on what they consistently do has something far more durable, because the practice is always available, always renewable, always capable of being chosen again today, regardless of what happened yesterday. This is not a small distinction. It is perhaps the most important one, because it means that the loss of a result, the fading of the fitness, the plateau of the business, the temporary disappearance of the recognition, does not destabilize the person. Their foundation is not in the result. It is in the discipline that produced it, and discipline, unlike results, cannot be taken by circumstance. Let me leave you with this. Victory is not the end of the story. It is the most dangerous chapter of it, because failure, for all its difficulty, is honest. It tells you clearly that something must change. It removes the option of complacency. It forces the reckoning that growth requires. A person in failure knows, without ambiguity, that they cannot afford to stop. Victory tells a different story. Victory says, you have arrived, you have earned rest, you deserve to release the pressure. And all of that is true, partially, temporarily, in the right proportion. But victory, unlike failure, can be misread. It can be taken as a conclusion when it is only a milestone. It can be allowed to become an identity when it is only an event. And when that happens, when the victory is mistaken for the destination, the person who won begins, quietly and without realizing it, to lose. The real test of character is not how a person handles their lowest moments. It is how they handle their highest ones. Anyone can be humbled by failure. It takes a particular quality of discipline, a rare and difficult one, to remain humble in success, to look at the achievement without being captured by it, to enjoy the reward without being softened by it, to let the victory pass through you like weather and return, the morning after, to the work. Aristotle called this kind of person the magnanimous man. Not the man who is great in his own opinion, but the man who is great in his orientation toward what is actually great. The man who does not confuse the mirror with the thing it reflects, who knows that what he sees in the achievement is the result of what he cannot see. The accumulated choices, the quiet refusals, the daily disciplines that no one observed and no one applauded. That is the man who does not let victory defeat him, not because he is incapable of enjoying it, but because he knows, with a clarity that comfort cannot dissolve, that the victory belongs to the practice, and the practice must continue. The fire that built you is the fire that keeps you, and it is always your responsibility to tend it. Never let it go cold.